Hey everybody, it's Dr. Doss. Welcome back to my channel, Biblical Languages and Literature. And today we're continuing on with our exposition of the book of Daniel, specifically the Hebrew and Aramaic text of Daniel. As many of you are familiar with, the book of Daniel is basically half in Hebrew, half in Aramaic. Chapter 1 and chapters 8 through 12 are in Hebrew, and with some exceptions, chapter 2 through chapter 7 are in Aramaic. And so here we're in the Hebrew section, but before terribly long, we'll be off into the Aramaic section. And let us jump into Daniel 1:4. Yeladim asher en bahem kol me'um, or mum, we'll read that in a minute and talk about that. V'tovei marei umaskilim b'chol chokhmah, m'yodei da'at u'mevinei mada, ba'asher koach bahem, la'mod behechal hamelech. וללמדם ספר ולשון כסדים. ילדים אשר אין בהם כל מאום, or mum, we'll talk about that in a minute, וטובי מראה ומשכילים בכל חוכמה ויודעי דעת ומביני מדע, ואשר כוח בהם לעמוד בהיכל המלך, וללמדם ספר ולשון כסדים. ילדים אשר אין בהם כל מום, וטובי מראה ומשכילים בכל חוכמה ויודעי דעת ומביני מדע, ואשר כוח בהם לעמוד בהיכל המלך, וללמדם ספר ולשון כסדים. Okay, the first thing I want to point out here is that the verse, I should say, begins with the noun, the masculine plural noun, yeladim, which means youths. In modern Hebrew, it can mean children, but youths, okay? And so typically in Hebrew prose, we get a vav consecutive beginning a new sentence when the narrative is continuing. So the fact that we have just a noun here and there's no vav prefix or anything should cause us to pause and make sure we look at the broader context. So I want to go back to verse 3 for just a minute. Okay. And up in verse 3, we read in the last video, Vayomer HaMelech, and so the king said le'Ashpenaz, so the king said to Ashpenaz, or the king commanded Ashpenaz, Rav Srisav, his chief official, some people say chief eunuch, lehavi, right, to bring, lehavi, to bring, mibnei Israel, from the people of Israel, okay, from the Israelites, umizera hamlucha, and from the royal family, from the seed of the kingdom, literally, and from umin hapartemim, and from the nobility. But it doesn't say, verse 3 doesn't tell us what to bring, what they're supposed to bring, and so that is where verse 4 picks up. Okay, what they're supposed to bring are, as we see in verse 4, yeladim, youths. Okay, they're supposed to bring youths. So this goes to show us that the sof pasuk, the end of a verse, does not necessarily indicate the end of a sentence. Remember that verse divisions are a little arbitrary, and in this case, I think it would have been better if there were no sof pasuk here, but you can see that verse 4 is already so long, and so this was probably just understood as a sensible division of the text, but clearly the sof pasuk here does not indicate the end of the complete sentence, because that continues on into verse 4. Okay? And so, Yeladim, asher en bahem, which, the relative pronoun, so youths, which, ein means there is not. This is a negative existential particle. Asher en bahem, in them, third masculine plural, suffix pronoun, attached to the preposition ba. So, youths, which there is not in them, or youths, we would say in English, in whom there is not, kol, and then you can see here in the digital edition, that we get two readings, me'um and mum. Now, I want to show you from the manuscript. I'm going to open the Leningrad Codex. Okay, so here on the left you see Daniel chapter 1, right, beginning with Bishnat. So let's zoom in a little. Okay, and so here is Yeladim by the arrow, and you can see where verse 4 begins. There's the Sof Pasuk. Okay, let me zoom in just a little for you. Okay, so Yeladim, Asher, we'll go over here, En Bahem, and notice that the Beit looks an awful lot like a Kaf, so you have to be careful when you're reading in the manuscripts. But En Bahem, okay, and now we get Kol. And now the way the form is written, the letters are Mem, Aleph, Vav, Mem. Mem, Aleph, Vav, Mem. But notice that underneath the Mem, we do not get a schwa, we get the U vowel, the short U vowel. But we also have a U vowel here. Okay, but what this is indicating is that we are not to read this word with the aleph. Okay, now you'll notice there's a sursilis here. These are people who, in this context, many of whom have been sacrificed, right? And this, in order to understand this, we need to understand something about the revolt against Antiochus Epiphanes IV, or Antiochus IV Epiphanes, I should say, who was the Seleucid oppressor of the Jews at that time, and against whom the Jews had to revolt in the 2nd century. And so I just want to point out that in Daniel 1, it's kind of a foretaste of what we're going to get in the apocalyptic message of Daniel 12. And we'll flesh that out in detail some other time, but you get the idea for now. Anywho, so let's go back to Daniel chapter 1, and we're going to put this back into Hebrew here. So Daniel chapter 1, we're going to put this back into Hebrew. And let me just increase the size of the text here. All right, so we have Yeladim asher en bahem kol mum v'tovei marei umaskilim, right? And those who are skilled, bechol chokhmah, in all wisdom, v'yodei da'at u'mevinei mada, va'asher koach bahem. And so we get here, just a bunch of synonymous Hebrew phrases, which mean, they're skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge. Here, v'yodei, knowers of knowledge, literally, but the term yada in Hebrew has to be, we can't always just translate to know. It depends on the context. So I like the expression endowed with knowledge, but knowers of knowledge is literally what it says. It's just kind of wooden and doesn't work in English very well. Umevine mada, right? And those who are understanding of learning. Again, kind of an awkward literal translation, but that's what it means. Okay, Vasher koach bahem, and they have, strength in them, fortitude. Okay, in them. And this language here sounds a lot like the book of Proverbs. So Daniel is technically an apocalyptic book, but it draws very heavily from the wisdom tradition, just as much as it does from the priestly and the prophetic traditions. And if we're going to understand the book of Daniel, we need to understand about the 4 previous intellectual traditions in Israel. And you have the legal system, you have the prophetic system, right, or the prophetic intellectual tradition, and priestly, and of course the wisdom tradition, right? And anyways, so Jewish apocalyptic is really a combination of other Jewish intellectual traditions and I should really say Israelite intellectual traditions, because it predates the time of Daniel. Anyways, so it says then, so that these people of great understanding and fortitude, these young people, these Yeladim, might be brought, right, by Ashpenaz, it says, la'amod, in order to stand, and that's an infinitive construct, in order to stand, behechal hamelech, in the palace of the king, in the king's palace, we could say, behechal hamelech, okay? Right, and lalamdam, interesting form we'll look at some other time, but lalamdam, in order to teach them, right, in order to teach them sefer, which in modern Hebrew is a word for book, but here, yeah, you might translate it literature, ulishon kasdim, and that would be the language of the Chaldeans. Okay, all right, we'll pick up next time in Daniel 5, and maybe during that video we'll have some time to discuss some of the cultural and historical background. Well, that does it for today's video. If you have any comments or questions, please be sure to post them on the Patreon page, and I will get back to you with my answers and replies as soon as I can. See you next time, everybody.